I'm frequently asked, what are the differences between a manager and a leader? And so today we're going to do a deep dive and see how they're different and where they overlap. So let's start with a brief discussion of the differences between leadership and management. These are really two distinct concepts, and both are critically important for an organization and for companies to be successful. So, leadership involves inspiration, involves setting the vision. It's about inspiring teams. It drives long-term success. While management is more about the organization, the planning, the controlling of resources. What I like to say is that we lead people and we manage processes. So if it's related to a process, it's a management job. And if it's related to people, it's all about leadership. Now, both of these require certain skills. And as we're going to see, some of those skills overlap. And my intent here is at the end of this is what you'll really realize is these are not different roles, but different skills for a single person to have in order to be successful in either role, whatever you call the role. To be a successful manager, we need to know how to lead people. And to be a successful leader, we really need to know how to manage processes and systems. So let's dig into this. As I mentioned a minute ago, leaders have a different role. And as you go up in an organization, your managerial responsibilities become less and less, and your leadership becomes greater. So, a CEO, certainly chairman of the board, right, their jobs are really looking out 10,000 miles, looking at the horizon, whatever that timeline might be for you and your organization, so that you're planning strategically far enough ahead that you can overcome issues that come up. And you want to take into account what are the resources you need, et cetera. But the utilization of those resources are no longer your real responsibility, other than the other leaders, the subordinate leaders who are working under you. So at that very, very top level, the people you're managing are really leaders who hopefully are self-managing. In other words, they deal with their own processes, and you don't have to get involved at a managerial level. Let's flip the script there at the other side. When you first step into a leadership role, it might very well just be as a supervisor. And I don't mean to minimize that. Supervisors are critically important, but supervisors are not looking 5, 10 years ahead. They're looking to the end of the day, the end of the week, maybe the end of the month, and their job's much more tactical. And so this is the beginning of the bridge to leadership, where you have some leadership responsibilities, but you're also going to have some and a lot of managerial responsibilities because you're going to be focused on the day-to-day operations. Now, both leaders and managers need some very common skills. You both need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to make tough decisions and sometimes solve complex problems. And more importantly, know when to solve a problem and when not to solve a problems. Leaders on the one hand, though, your job is to inspire, while the manager's job is to either create processes and procedures, improve processes and procedures, or sometimes get rid of and eliminate them if they're either obsolete or unwieldy and no longer working and replace them. So the manager side is really focusing on what gets done and how it gets done. Now, that is a leadership skill, and we'll come to look at that in a minute. So let's talk about what the leadership skills that are essential. As a leader, first of all, we need to understand people. We need to understand what motivates them, what inspires them, and what's the difference between motivation and inspiration. In fact, this is one of the failing points I often see as managers try to lead and they don't understand the difference because motivation is external. Hey, work for me and I'll give you $100 bonus. Work extra or time and a half. That's a form of motivation to get people to work longer hours. And the reason I say that is so motivation is external, Think of it like giving a spur to a horse that doesn't want to run. The moment you stop kicking that horse, they stop running. The moment you take away a bonus, for example, people are going to stop that behavior. Inspirational is internal, and that's a leadership skill. So when we inspire, we actually light a fire inside of people so they want to do whatever this thing is, this extra work we want to get done. And you can't take away that inspiration. Oh, you can dampen it. Trust me, you can absolutely do things to dampen it. But as long as you flame the inspiration, it doesn't require an external reward. People do it because they want to. And so good leaders and great leaders understand that. And they understand how to get people to become inspired. So as we're starting our managerial career path, these are the sort of things that we want to start to learn. Understand that people are inspired when they're supported, when they're set up for success, when they're appreciated. By the way, appreciation also means being held accountable. It doesn't just mean saying you did a good job when you did a good job. You actually appreciate somebody when you tell them you didn't do it quite right. And let me show you how you can do it correctly the next time. Let me set you up for success. And that's actually a different form of appreciation, right? So as managers start to understand these skills, they start stepping into that leadership role. Leaders must have integrity. So, and I'm not to say managers don't need to have integrity, but if you're in a pure managerial role, right, you think about this for a second. If your job is just to hold people's feet to the fire to follow a process, and you don't care about the inspiration piece, right? We can do that with, for example, punishment, etc. So now it doesn't matter what I do, what kind of, as long as you know that something bad's going to happen if you don't do it, you will follow that process. The challenge is if you're only managing, people are going to do the minimum to avoid punishment. Whereas if we're leading, we're going to inspire them to rise above it and to become better. In fact, leadership is all about inspiring others to be the best themselves they can be. Now, that's a tricky statement because as we improve, as we become a better form of self, and that becomes our new reality, there's another level above that, and then another level above that. So leadership requires constant inspiration, constantly trying to get people to rise to become the next best form of themselves. Subsequently, that's also the most rewarding part of leadership. When we do that, we're getting people to actually enjoy their lives that much more. As they step into new roles, new possibilities, as they challenge themselves and grow into that, there's that sense of reward. And seeing somebody rise to the occasion is one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my career. So that's the leadership piece of it. Now, in order to do that, as I said, we need to set people up for success. And to do that, we need to have good processes in place and ensure we have good processes for teaching people how to follow the workflow and good processes for educating them how they can step into their next role. So all of that piece is the managerial side where we're dealing with the processes. We need a process so that when something goes wrong, we can evaluate it fairly to determine, was it a systemic issue? Did the process break down? Or was it a personnel issue? The person failed to follow the process. And good managers and good leaders both will do that. The manager wants to know, is there something flawed here? Because if it's flawed, I want to fix it. That's the managerial mindset. The leader says, is there something flawed here? Because if it is, there is, if the process is flawed, I'm setting my people up for failure instead of success. And that's the leadership mindset. But it's both wanting to do the same thing. So there's absolutely overlap between effective leadership or being a leader and being a manager. You cannot be a good leader without good managerial skills. Now, there are certain things that are different. There are certain skills, and you don't necessarily have to have them yourself. For example, a good manager is able to direct and control tasks very effectively, right? So they're both good communicators, but communicating vision is a different skill than communicating what I need you to do right now. And I don't mean micromanaging. I mean communicating so that people understand what success looks like. They understand the boundaries within which they have to work, and they understand where to get the information they need if they have to figure something out, as well as what latitude they have to make decisions. And a good manager knows how to communicate all that. They understand attention to detail because sometimes it's that detail that'll kill you. Again, not to micromanage, but for oversight. So you can see if something is being overlooked and step in at the appropriate time so that somebody has enough opportunity to learn without something going devastatingly wrong when appropriate. And sometimes a manager needs the discernment to let things go wrong. Now that's stepping a little bit into the leadership side because now the manager is saying, I want you to learn and improve and be a better form of you. I'm going to let you make this mistake because in the grand scheme of things, we'll be better off when you learn this lesson. And so you take that hit up front, knowing in the long run, the team member is going to rise to the occasion and become better at it. You know, when I was in high school, I got a job at a fast food restaurant where we served Kentucky Fried Chicken. It wasn't KFC, it was a franchise company called Gino in the Northeast. And at first, I got a lot of hours, but they started diminishing. And I couldn't figure out why because I didn't goof around. But one day, my manager came to me and said, you need to be able to figure out the difference between the breasts and thighs. I couldn't tell the difference, or I'm not going to be able to use you anymore. So he'd given me enough rope to try and figure it out on my own. And then he stepped in his leadership role and he told me what the consequences of failing to correct this problem very quickly. I don't remember how much time I had. It was probably a week or two at the most. I promise you, my very next shift, I got it figured out. And all of a sudden, my hours started going up again because I would show up when I was supposed to. I would do all the other things I was supposed to, but they required me to have this one skill, right? So that's the manager stepping into a leadership role, inspiring me to become a better me at 16. Managers frequently have to be able to solve complex issues, just like leaders. The difference is the complex issue that managers solve are typically emergent issues. So there's a real sense of time that if it's not fixed right now, something catastrophic is going to happen. Leaders are looking at issues down the road that are also complex, but they have a little more timeline, a little more bandwidth in which to get those problems fixed. So as you can see, there is a overlap between managers and leaders. They both work in the same house on two different aspects because people are involved. And unlike what we were taught years and years ago, people are not cogs. We're not interchangeable. So the great leader knows how to look at somebody, talk to somebody, understand what their desires are, their hopes, their dreams or visions, and then tap into that so they can give that to them, get them fulfilled within the aspect of the organization. Well, the manager makes sure that all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, the processes are followed so that the leader side can look at that information and data and know whether they're doing the things they need to do, if they're getting things done. So the two roles really work hand in hand. So what's the difference? Very little, actually. Managers focus on the process, leaders focus on the people. Great managers also focus on the people and therefore are great leaders, and great leaders also focus on the process and in that respect become great managers.